Actually, on this real quick, because I'd like to get your reaction to this. If you have it, Matt, this Economist, this came out 2 days ago, and it's great. I'm just going to read everyone the first paragraph because it's so good.
Yes,
a very foreboding photograph of picture of AMLO, which again, this was the same thing they were running in 2018 as well. The title is "Voters should curb Mexico's power-hungry president." Let's get this opening paragraph because it's so good. In a world plagued by authoritarian populists, Mexico's president has somehow escaped the limelight. Liberals furiously condemn the erosion of democratic norms under Hungary's Viktor Orban, India's Narendra Modi, Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro, and barely notice Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador.
Oh, God.
This is partly because he lacks some of the vices of his populist peers. He does not deride gay people, bash Muslims, or spur supporters to torch the Amazon. To his credit, he speaks out loudly and often for Mexico's have-nots, and he is not personally corrupt. Nonetheless, he is a danger to Mexican democracy.
Right, the pure, untrammeled Mexican democracy that existed before AMLO, right? Before AMLO, the Mexican Congress was literally bribed to pass the structural reforms of the 2010s that opened up the sector to, maybe the Economist really wasn't that concerned about it at the time, but the Mexican Congress was open for sale through these bribes called moches back in the 2010s, right? It's almost impossible to find a member of the PRI in the PAN, an ex-governor of the last 20 years, that isn't in jail, on the lam, under investigation, right? Mm-hmm. The Economist wasn't particularly concerned about those things either, because Mexican democracy was, chef's kiss before AMLO came in and endangered it. And this whole thing that that AMLO is a danger to Mexican democracy is just a repetition of the same thing they've been saying since his first presidential campaign in 2006. They haven't even come up with anything new. Mm-hmm. In 2006, they ran spots that Mexico was Chavez and was a danger to democracy. That was created by Solá, the Spanish advisor to the PAN campaign at the time. This is just a recycled little hit piece. And I like a little bit farther down the piece when they said, AMLO tells people to shut up in cabinet meetings. Really? Does he really? How juvenile! Is that all you've got?
It's incredible. You have that, and then there's all this people getting worked up about his press conferences, right?
Right.
And it's like, is this a really? It's amazing to see that compared to what was happening in the U.S. with Trump at the same time when he came to the White House press corps. And them freaking about, AMLO is speaking to the press and just giving these like seminars and stuff. It's like, well, doesn't this sound nice?
Heaven forbid a president is accountable to the press.
I don't understand.
We don't want that. What they hate about Mexico, they hate about AMLO's press conferences, which are called mañaneras, is that they're devastatingly effective. Mm-hmm. They're very effective. AMLO goes in front of the press every morning at 7:00 in the morning and takes questions for 2 hours. Anything people want to ask. I'll get online. I don't have AMLO's, early rising skills to that extent. I'll get online 8:30, sometimes 9, and I'm like, oh, the press conference is still going, And but what the mañanera has been a way, and I think this is a very important point that I think we've lost in the United States a lot, is the way to keep the base engaged when it's not election time. Mm-hmm. Here we get all engaged during the primaries, and in the U.S. We get all engaged, for a few months, trying to get, somebody like Bernie elected in the primaries or, whatever else. And then there's not a mechanism outside of election time to do that. The mañanera has been a way for AMLO to speak over the heads of the press, which usually filters and twists, everything he says, and he can speak directly to them. People can go online and watch the mañanera directly. They can see what the president directly. They can see the answers to questions directly, right? Without getting 30-second clips on the news, right? And AMLO gives these master classes in media criticism, right? So he'll point out a distorted media article. He'll put the article up on the screen. He'll break out the receipts. He'll break out old contracts. He'll give you the backstory and what's really going on. And it's just this masterclass on media criticism and political history in the country every morning for a couple hours, right? And the press hates that, and that's why they call him like a Trump, because he doesn't stand there and take press hits lying down. The idea is that the left is supposed to just take, having a wall of press against them and just take it lying down. Because if you don't take it lying down, you're authoritarian. Watch it. You're an autocrat, right? How dare you speak back, right? AMLO may have the presidency, but that doesn't mean that 90% of Mexico's press isn't still against him on a daily basis, including the television stations, including the major, including, a lot of people who made a lot of money, called the chayote in Mexican slang, off of previous administrations, which doled out millions and millions of dollars worth of governmental publicity to these media people to keep them on side. So that's dried up, and which is another reason why they hate AMLO all the more, right? That nice little game where the elite strata of press will become immensely rich off of governmental publicity and governmental largesse. That spigot is closed, right? And they hate that, and they hate the Mañaneras to the extent that the National Electoral Institute tried to stop the Mañaneras from being transmitted during the campaign season, arguing that it was electoral propaganda. They lost, but they tried.
I can't understand that. Just as a simple question of democracy. You could really make that argument there. Did you have something, Matt?
Yeah, it just slipped my mind let me see. I'm sorry. No, I don't.
No worries. Well, I wanted to,
Oh, yes, I got it. I found it. So we talked about the sort of Trump comparisons, but you mentioned in a talk with Ben Burgess on the Jacobin YouTube channel last August that one of the keys to AMLO's popularity is taking the fight to the right. Are those press conferences the main way he's doing that, or tell us more about that domestically? Him taking on the right wing.
Yeah, the Mañanera is a main tool. Right. So every morning it's media criticism, and then he'll break out the receipts and kind of give a lesson on the backstory on a lot of the corruption over the previous years. So that's one thing, right? But I think it's important, AMLO is an incredibly polarizing figure to that extent, because he makes the argument in very simple terms, right, about what the Mexican right stands for, right, and is in very simple terms makes the argument that neoliberalism, certainly in the Mexican incarnation, but in many incarnations, neoliberalism was corruption. Neoliberalism was the selling off of the Mexican state to a strata of rich people that became incredibly wealthy, distorted the political system even more than it was, and created a kleptocracy that has affected everyone. And he has been very effective at ramming that argument again, and again. And I think that's an important thing, right? Because I think it's easy to get into power, get into the trappings of power, and lose any kind of communication with your base, right? And then play defensive, and then we can't criticize the media too much. What else? AMLO doesn't care. He's also out there a lot. He's also, when the pandemia permits, the guy works a 7-day week. So he's in Mexico City 4 or 5 days. Then on weekends, he's out in the countryside. He's out supervising projects. He's out, all over the country, eating at small town eateries, next to the road. So he takes these videos and he's like, I'm in the taqueria of Doña Rosinda, and she makes these great tacos. And it could seem like in another politician's hands like a gimmick, right? He's to take the baño del pueblo, right? But with AMLO, it works in the sense of he's got a common touch, which you can't make up, He can go, this is a guy who was in, like we talked about Bob Dylan's Never Ending Tour. He was in the Never Ending campaign from 2006 through to 2018. He was constantly going to the 2,500 municipalities in the country, going again. And Mexico, that's no small things. A lot of these municipalities are, up dirt roads and 8 hours away from a paved road and whatever else. One can make the argument that he's kind of continuing with the traditional Mexican presidentialism of concentrating, everything on him, right? And it's true that, Morena as a party is very much in his shadow. And Morena is going to have to evolve into a much more democratic organization than it is once he leaves office in a few years. And that's going to be Morena's big challenge, right? Because, Morena, on one hand, receives public financing, which is great that Mexico has a public financing system. But the problem with that, too, is that it can create a system where, party members are just looking for the public financing instead of creating and articulating a popular movement, which Morena has not done particularly well as of yet. I mean, it's got a motivated base of very dedicated people, but it's still very much in the old structure of, winning elections, and so sometimes they've made some very questionable choices of candidates in order to win elections in the short term rather than building, a base of new young candidates over the long term.
Right. Yeah. And I would just say to the, the listener, just like, yeah, all these things are, we're engaging in criticism, and like left-wing politics, especially, is like the party question is crucial, right? It's like you can't just go for winning elections is great, but to not only do you have to win elections, but to build the coalitions and the movements that can enact these policies, you have to deal with the party question. So, that's on one hand. One of the big reasons we're talking a lot about AMLO tonight is, especially in the U.S. context, it's insane the way that he gets smeared.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It would be much better if we were able to spend more of our time thinking and having conversations about how can we improve party structures and things like that. But we have to spend a lot of time pushing back against a lot of nonsense narratives like the attacks against AMLO.
Well, it's absolutely true. And I find myself, I think, one of the, I'm not the only one, but I mean, a few English language journalists writing about AMLO, spending more time defending AMLO against absurd attacks. And I think we'd all like to be doing what you said, David, which is to be articulating a reasoned critique of where the movement is doing well. I think we've named quite a few of those: the transfer programs, marijuana legalization, a series of important infrastructure projects. Rolling back outsourcing, the Electric Industry Act and others. And then other areas where the movement hasn't hopefully yet come up to snuff. And that means reining in the mining industry here, dominated by Canadian and American mining interests that have devastated the environment and have killed activists and, are taking more minerals out of Mexico than during the time of the conquest. I mean, it's a neo-conquest that continues to this day, on a much larger scale. A banking system, a very predatory oligarchic banking system of 6 major banks that, I wrote an article about that prey on poor people, just like in the States, minimum balance requirements and fees here, fees there, fees this, right? And making more money in Mexico than they make in their home countries. So the mining industry, the banking sector, creating a long-term climate change plan, a way of relating with indigenous communities that's not just based on mega projects. Where development slips over into developmentism, right? A way of addressing the plague of feminicides and violence against women, right? There's a lot more to do, right? I think we'd all be liking to make a reasoned critique of what's gone on, right? I think I find myself, defending against the Economist, which they don't even try to make a reasoned critique. It's like and then I don't know if you noticed, but the Economist they published 2 anti-AMLO articles, and then they were doing it in their Twitter over and over and over again, as if it were like paid publicity.
It's that, and also just with the Economist, and we could just have a whole show on the problems with the publication. But the way to link AMLO to Bolsonaro, to Orban, and to Modi is despicable in the first place. But also, I remember when Modi first came to power, and the glowing coverage in the Economist.
Oh, yes.
Modi is going to revolutionize India, is bringing them into the future, and now we're using him, as a villain. Which is
Bolsonaro too.
Yeah, Bolsonaro too is another great example. I mean, it's amazing, just the way that they use these figures and how oftentimes they are just flat out wrong when they're making their initial analysis.
Yeah, The Economist said Bolsonaro is a dangerous figure, but with some good ideas. Right? that was The Economist's great take on that. And it's funny that the social media in Mexico have been pulling out all these old articles from The Economist when The Economist supported the assassination of Madero in the Mexican Revolution. They supported the dictator Huerta back 100 years ago. Putting their thumb against democratic interest in the revolution. This is The Economist's old game. There's not a coup in Latin America that The Economist doesn't support. Mm-hmm. And it's funny how they do it too. If you notice in the article from The Economist, what it says is AMLO grew up in the 70s in Tabasco and is used to the largesse of an oil producing area. How demeaning is that? How demeaning is that to say, I can psychoanalyze you from London, and I know who you are because you grew up in Tabasco, and there was a lot of oil, and there was a lot of state largesse, and of course you're not capable of thinking for yourself, AMLO, so it must be a product of your childhood. David Agnew in The Guardian did a similar thing. He did a whole thing on the energy thing, and he did almost the exact same thing, right? Mm-hmm. AMLO's outlook on energy is because he grew up in Tabasco in the 70s. It's like, wow, really, Dr. Freud? That's amazing. Would you do the same thing to Angela Merkel's outlook on the Greek debt crisis is because she grew up in East Germany? Can you imagine them trying to pull something like that with Macron?
I mean, honestly, it's like Wikipedia mining, right? It's like, it's like last minute, I got to do my paper. Yeah. Let me find like a narrative, right? Okay, where's she born? Boom. I got the story together.
It's extraordinary, right? It's extraordinary. And the idea, too, of this false messiah, this is an idea that goes back to 2006 with Enrique Krause, who was the House historian of conservative governments in Mexico, who hates AMLO with another visceral elite passion, right? And called AMLO the tropical messiah. And so the implication is that the Mexican public is too stupid to think for itself, and so can only vote for a messiah, a Christ figure, because they're absolutely too stupid to have any kind of, it's not rational to look at decades of corruption and kleptocracy and vote for another alternative. Actually, that strikes me as very logical, a very rational decision, right? To vote for somebody else who doesn't represent the country, the parties that ran you into the ground. Mm-hmm. But no, people are stupid, so they can only vote for messiahs. And not only a messiah, a tropical messiah, a backward tropical messiah who tricks people through populist rhetoric, right? That's the demeaning idea here. And what The Economist just did was recycle Krause's argument from 2006, right? Mm-hmm. And then they wonder why they lose. And then they wonder why they're losing. Mm-hmm. It's extraordinary that in these elections on Sunday, the PRI and the PAN and the PRID, three parties have ganged up against Morena. The PAN, the Conservative Party, the PRI, the former Hegemonic Party, and what's left of the PRD, which was AMLO's former party. Three parties together, and even then they can't win. And they wonder why they can't win when they're constantly insulting the public with stuff like that over and over again. And that's all they've got.
Well, I mean, hopefully for the future of of Mexico and the world, that they rely on that strategy going forward.
Yeah, Kurt, hopefully they don't learn.
Exactly. No, hopefully they could keep it up. Kurt, I really appreciated this. I'd love to do it again sometimes. And we're looking forward to hopefully good results on Sunday. And thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your reporting.